Hello, fellow inquisitives. What is a paradigm? Today, it's an overused term, so much so that some experts recommend avoiding the term altogether. In the way we use it in this organization, it suggests a way of thinking about things, of observing the world, interpreting what an individual sees. My understanding of paradigms was heavily influenced by the work of Thomas S. Kuhn in his landmark work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, first published in 1962. He describes a theoretical framework within which a community thinks and operates. As I came to understand the notion, I really see paradigms as a worldview that has pillars or centers of gravity, the core assumptions about how a user interprets and understands the world around them. These pillars aren't objective, they're values. The concept is best captured in religion. For example, in the Judeo-Christian traditions, the pillars of that paradigm may be thought of as the Ten Commandments. In Islam, it's the pillars of Islam, and in Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. When we think about the core assumptions used in science, it's a little harder to determine exactly what those are. Science wants to think itself objective. But objectivity is really just a value. It's a pillar of a belief system that's built around it. What are the other pillars? Truth is I don't know. Some may cite the scientific method and other methodologies, but these are really more standard operating procedures that form within the boundaries or the centers of gravity created by the assumptions of a larger paradigm. What it comes down to is that paradigms involve values, which in today's way of thinking are products of the mind. They're subjective, they're not objective. This is ironic because science, thinking that it's objective, sees no role for values or a paradigm. It assumes that the value of objectivity makes it objective. It doesn't. Values do have a role in an objective interpretation of the universe, which means it's not purely objective. In this video, we dive more into the concept of paradigms, explore what they are, followed by concepts of the paradigm shift, and introduction of a concept I call surfing the paradigm. Without further ado, let's tackle these concepts and see what we can find. Don't forget to stop by CesariProject.com. I start with an internet search of what is a paradigm. Here, from Oxford Languages, are some definitions. 1, a typical example or pattern of something. A model. I don't like this definition. When we think of a typical example or model, it sounds like there's an ideal, which is a different concept than having pillars or guidelines that shape one's way of thinking about their observations. Down here it says a worldview underlying the theories and methodology of a particular subject. That's a little bit closer to what I'm thinking of. The following two definitions get into linguistics, which serve a different function. If we look at the origin of the word paradigm, we see that para comes from Greek meaning beside, and the word dime comes from the root to show. Together they are show side by side. However, when we think of the prefix para, it has other meanings as well. The one I like is beyond. The idea of beyond means something that is not readily visible. It's something that's kind of pulling an observer in a particular direction. It's like a headlamp into the future that shapes expectation. In that way, paradigms and the pillars that uphold them are more like guiding principles, whether a user can enunciate them or not. They shape the creative sandbox of perceived possibility. Let's look at other paradigm definitions. Merriam-Webster starts with an outstandingly clear or typical example or archetype. An archetype is an original pattern or model, which all things of the same type are representations or copies. That again kind of harkens to this idea of there's an ideal and everything is just a copy of it. In science, we certainly use this concept. We think that a certain atom or molecule is just a copy of every other atom or molecule of the same type. We do the same thing in medicine. A human body is a human body, sure with some nuances with personality and genetic differences, which underpins that notion of an archetype, that there's a basic model that applies across the board. That again is not my usage of the term paradigm. This definition states a philosophical or theoretical framework of a scientific school or discipline within which theories, laws, and generalizations and the experiments performed in support of them are formulated. This is getting a lot closer. This is talking about general assumptions, a framework within which a culture forms and ideas and beliefs form. Further down on this page is additional discussion that there's a debate about what qualifies as a paradigm. Some people say it's a typical example, while others state it's an outstanding or perfect example. I think it's neither. The scientific application really came down to the work of Thomas S. Kuhn in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which I mentioned previously. In this article published in Simply Psychology, Dr. Saul McLeod does a nice job of summarizing Thomas S. Kuhn's work. Historically, scientific progress was thought to be an accumulation of knowledge, facts, and data over time. Mr. Kuhn posited that revolutions occur when people think differently about those data, knowledge, and facts. In that way, the data and information don't change, but the view of what it means, the system that is used to interpret it. When that perception changes, the researcher, quote, sees new and different things when looking with familiar instruments in places that researcher has looked before. That nails it right on the head. Again, religion illustrates that really well. Someone who believes in God or a higher power sees the effects of that higher power everywhere they look. An atheist sees the absence of God or a higher power everywhere they look. It's very difficult for a person using one paradigm to understand or appreciate the understanding of the other paradigm. And one person doesn't necessarily represent one paradigm. Humans are complex beings. One person can subscribe to multiple paradigms. Someone can be very religious and believe in a higher power and also believe in the objectivity of science that doesn't really have a place for a higher power. How that person integrates those paradigms in his or her own mind really becomes a matter of personal reconciliation and opinion where those paradigms do not agree. Back to McLeod's article, a scientific revolution occurs when 1. A new paradigm better explains the observations and offers a model that is closer to the objective external reality, and 2. The new paradigm is incommensurate with the old. To break that down, the first bullet is sufficient with just the first half. The new paradigm better explains the observations, period. The second half, that it is closer to an objective external reality, is today's scientific thinking. Again, objectivity is a value of science, but it's not requisite for a paradigm. The second is that the new paradigm is incommensurate with the old, meaning ideas that explain data in one paradigm may not make any sense in the second. The interesting part about paradigms is it's not necessarily an intellectual barrier. Bright people can appreciate a different way of looking at data and information and intellectually understand it. However, to shift a paradigm and to perceive the world using a new set of rules, a new set of values and standards, is a subjective phenomenon. It happens more by insight and an aha moment than by any logical process. The definition of a paradigm here is a basic framework of assumptions, principles, and methods from which the members of the community work. The assumptions, again, are the pillars, though I would say the methods are more like standard operating procedures that evolve within a paradigm, but don't necessarily define it. Kuhn's work discusses a paradigm as having a life cycle. It's a living deal. Briefly, the pre-science stage happens before a consensus has been reached. It tends to be disorganized and diverse. There's constant debate over fundamentals. There are as many theories as there are theorists, and there's no commonly accepted observational basis. Truthfully, if we talk about disease, I think this illustrates where we are today exactly. As much as we say we're scientific, there's a lot of disorganized and diverse beliefs. There's constant debate over fundamentals. There's many theories as there are theorists. This is very much where we are. Despite that, we function as if we're in phase 2, which is normal science. Today's medical science was established when Louis Pasteur developed germ theory. That really created the rules of today's paradigm and is extended into chronic disease, although it doesn't work very well there for a lot of reasons. This laid the foundation for legitimate work within the medical science field. In this phase, it's really about solving puzzles. When we're looking at DNA and proteins and cellular functions in disease, we very much approach this as if we are solving puzzles. But the trouble is, our assumptions using to solve those puzzles aren't working very well. And we don't even know what those assumptions are. So germ theory did set a precedent, like it or not. Puzzles that resist solutions are seen as anomalies. I would say we have more anomalies than not in today's understanding. That's a big red flag. Anomalies are tolerated and do not cause the rejection of a theory. Yeah, germ theory definitely hasn't been rejected, and we have a huge tolerance for anomalies. They happen all the time. When these anomalies arise, it begins to create a drift, a pull towards something else, a better explanation. But normal science tends to pull it back. That's very much feeding back into the validity of the paradigm and reinforces that questioning it or using ideas that go outside the paradigm look pretty fantastical and unscientific. It's necessary for normal science to be uncritical. If all scientists were critical of a theory and spent time trying to falsify it, then no detailed work would ever get done. Well, we need to change that because we're so focused on detailed work, we've absolutely lost the forest for the trees in terms of disease and understanding life. Phase 3 is crisis. This is where a paradigm shift occurs. It's when the anomalies become so serious that somebody steps back and says, this isn't working. We need a solution to better explain these observations. When there's more anomalies than there are things that we can predict, something's wrong with the way we're thinking about the problem. That's one of the challenges in science today. We think that when we're looking at something, be that a cellular process or a patient's disease, we don't feel like we're using a paradigm, which is the definition of a paradigm. It's a worldview. It's your reality, whether you know the rules of it or not. You think there's just a direct relationship between you and the observation, but you miss that you're using rules to assign meaning to that observation. When we finally step back and say, well, maybe we're not using the right rules of our observation, then we can start thinking more about, well, what are the rules? And do we need to relax them, change them? What would that mean? It's when we start thinking that way that new theories and ideas begin to emerge. Between that step and this one, revolution, which is phase 4, there's a giant chasm. There's that leap of faith with no logical connection between two paradigms that are incommensurate. You cannot overlap them and think that the meaning in one will have meaning in the other. Shifting paradigms won't necessarily be logically compelling, which is one of the challenges. When you're trying to escape a scientific paradigm, it requires ideas and insights and thoughts that don't make sense in the current paradigm. That's how it works. And it's really hard to mentally negotiate that. There's a fine river between the lunatics and the brilliant here. And again, the reason for choice of a paradigm are largely psychological and sociological. It's not a matter of being smart, intellectual, it's subjective. So a new paradigm better explains observations. A new paradigm cannot be proven or disproven by the rules of the old paradigm. And there's no way to measure or scale different paradigms. They're just simply that different. Now that we've talked about paradigms and paradigm shifts, let's talk about a notion I created called surfing the paradigm. This indicates a tendency to use existing data with existing interpretations under an existing paradigm to explain away anomalies and dismiss insights. Today's medical science is a really pervasive worldview. And yes, there are complementary and alternative medicine paradigms that sometimes integrate a little, but often not. I contend that even though there's this large variety, a buffet of beliefs about what causes disease, how life works, and whatnot, none of them reliably prevent, reverse, or cure disease. I suspect that these practices are actually more similar than not. We cannot really explain the rules or the assumptions that we're using to understand life and disease. We have definitions and a whole hodgepodge of qualities, both objective and subjective in nature, that just don't go together as well as we would like. That means we're not thinking about the problem correctly. As for surfing the paradigm, this is one of the video playlists for Zizare Project. These videos are fairly unstructured, and what I do is I find something that looks interesting, an article, a media clip, a quote, and I dive in and explore the thought processes that go behind it. There's a lot of confusion and paradoxes. We're lost in effects. We get distracted by all kinds of other things that we can't explain. It creates a lot of conflicting information and uncertainty. And what we find is there tends to be a self-reinforcing nature. We start to see the same themes over and over. In surfing the paradigm, I focus largely on healthcare, public health, clinical medicine, etc. A lot of times I end up going against the grain, which some people like and other people find very uncomfortable. But the truth is, if anything's ever going to change, we have to start having different conversations. We need to really step back and understand what we believe, because it's just not working. And the ultimate goal is to make it better. It's going to ruffle feathers along the way. But one thing that is notably different is the Zizare Project focuses on thinking about the problem. A lot of time, medical sciences and the other healing arts jump right into doing something about the problem, which can create safety hazards and money-making schemes. Instead, let's just focus on the paradigm and understanding where we're going wrong. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share your comments below. I'll see you soon.